We're about to begin the stretch run for 2023, and that's what I want to talk about on this segment of the Gig Geezer. If this is your first time checking out the Gig Geezer, if you're a returning visitor of the Gig Geezer, thanks for coming by. And if you would not mind, hit that subscribe button, give my content a thumbs up, share my content among others, and I definitely welcome your comments in the section below. Well, one thing, if I'm talking about looking at the fourth quarter 2023, what I don't want to do is use this time and opportunity to talk about what has transpired and looking back. How can you move forward if you're looking backwards? What I will say very quickly before I transition to what I'm looking ahead, most of the decisions that I've made so far in 2023 have been the right decisions. A couple of them that really stands out in mind is that my resisting the temptation to pursuing contract situations that at least for me, based on money earned at that time and even currently, would have been a pay cut. Although I understand how contract situations provide some stability for people, and I'm not knocking people for that if they are in a contract situation. Not at all. The other situation is that my avoiding the temptation or the lure or the enticement of start getting on with a carrier fleet and driving under them for the opportunity of gaining experience. As I've talked about on many occasions throughout the year, in that at least based on monies that I saw, what these carrier fleets were saying that you can earn, I've hit those numbers and have exceeded those numbers now. So if I just go based on those comparisons, I think I've made the right decisions by going the path that I have forged. But I've talked now for a couple of minutes now, and so I want to get into looking ahead, at least into the final quarter of 2023. I'm glad to be sharing content that reflects how I am still viable. I am still in business. I am still earning a profit, and I'm not in a dire straits situation. Although I will admit that I don't know what I'm going to do each day. I don't have that set schedule as someone else has when they have that contract situation. That's probably the best thing about being in a contract situation. You know that each day you're going to have something to do and money to earn. I wake up each day saying that I have money that I've got to earn, and somehow at the end of the day say that I did that. But that is one of the challenges when you are in business for yourself and when you choose to go the path that I've gone. Now, well, today is Saturday, September 23rd, 2023. We are also ending yet another month, and now we are entering into that final quarter of yet another year. And as I mentioned, how I have no idea what to expect, what I'm going to do every day. I have no idea what to expect, what this final quarter is going to be. We hear talk of a recession. We hear talk of this United Auto Workers strike. And the United Auto Workers strike will have some reverberating effect for a lot of people in a lot of ways. In fact, I'll give you a good example. A load that I completed earlier this week, which is from Sherrill, South Carolina to Atlanta's airport. That individual opportunity earned me over $440. But when listening to some of the workers talk and the logistics manager talk, they said how the United Auto Workers strike has already forced them, based on forecasts, to cut back on hours and shifts so that they can remain afloat themselves. What they said was that they are fortunate in that they have other customers other than the big three UAW customers, but they are already making changes. Now that has a reverberating effect down that supply chain, as does for people like me who are looking to the load boards for opportunities. It has an effect everywhere. It has a serious ripple effect. But if you're in business, you got to figure a way to make it one way or another. And that is my challenge, as well as anyone else who's in my situation. What I also have noticed is that the gig apps, they have slowed down. In fact, what I've noticed is that first I noticed earlier in the year how the gig food delivery apps had slowed down based on the changing demands of customers. But it's the last mile apps, they have slowed down somewhat too, in particular the last couple of weeks. And I've noticed it not only in my market, the Columbia, South Carolina metropolitan area, but everywhere I've gone throughout North Carolina and throughout Georgia. And now what I'm hearing, it's everywhere. So that's a challenge as well. The challenge really is to find ways to keep yourself in demand. And while even in good times, you have to find ways to keep yourself in demand, it's even more so now. Of course, people could talk about how you need to prepare for those rainy days. I get that. But just when you're just talking in terms of keeping that forward momentum, that is what I see what we have to do, is finding ways to keep ourselves moving. So for me, it may be finding new brokers, and it may also mean trying to forge relationships with some direct shippers or people that I have picked up from or dropped off to. Another thing for me is finally putting in motion my cash game. Now, I've mentioned that in recent segments of the Gig Geezer, and I am much closer to putting the cash game in motion. But I must admit that I've procrastinated on the cash game, although I've got things in place to do it. For whatever it's worth, at least personally, with the Gig Geezer, I've shared quite frequently numbers earned and so forth. As it pertains to this specific week, yes, I have earned over $2,000. In fact, I've earned over $2,100 this week. But the dollars earned in recent weeks have not been real comfortable earning type dollars. What I mean by that is there's always that constant concern. Sometimes they wake you up in the middle of the night wondering how you're going to make your money that day and how it's going to come about this day. But again, if you're in it, but if you are in for a challenge, a daily challenge, then you're in the right thing. If you're not into the daily challenge and the daily grind and the daily hustle of how you're going to make your money day in and day out, then this is not for you. You may want to get that W-2. You may want to veer towards that contract situation, and hopefully, there'll be enough volume to justify you being in that contract situation, because contract situations can change as well, in that the money that you think you'll be making on a contract can be less because of less volume. When I look at my numbers, the biggest number that stands out right now is that as of today, I have earned so far this year overall 1099 earnings over $78,000. I have communicated on many occasions, at least earlier this year, in which my goal is to earn over $100,000 in a year. But where I'm at as of today, I am definitely on track to earning more than $100,000. Now, once I get there, it may put me in a position to approach banks for commercial money, but I am not sure if I want to approach banks for commercial money, given how banks have been making changes as well. Now, one of the things I've talked about, I've already mentioned how what I want to do is find more brokers. I want to find some relationships with directly with shippers, and I also want to develop the cash game. But I do also want to articulate this. After I made the transition for this van back in December 2022, I looked at my operating this van as an immediate transition from operating out of my F-150. And so I've shared how on multiple occasions now how my first full day of operating this van, I had 2 catering opportunities up in Charlotte that earned me over $400. And since then, I have pretty much used this van every day. In fact, almost every mile that I've driven for pay or for money this year has been out of this Sprinter/cargo van. And so if you're gonna get the van, obviously you want to make as much money as you can from it. And so one of my biggest challenges this year in terms of remaining viable is making the type of money that not only pays the van payment, but to also pay the insurance payment. If there's anything that I've always been concerned about this year, has always been being in a position to always be able to make that insurance payment. Because without that insurance payment, it could be a bad day. Now, another thing that I've remained, that's always been at the forefront of my mind, is my initial strategy. My initial strategy has always been to operate gig apps, but at the time it was primarily gig food delivery apps, and I was only on a handful of last mile delivery apps. Of course, as over time, I have been onboarded with several other last mile gig delivery apps. In fact, if you check out this segment of the Rideshare Rodeo, in which I was a guest of Steve Rideshare Rodeo Johnson, I pointed out a point that Steve mentioned earlier this year, how there are far more last mile gig apps than there are gig food delivery apps. And so that is one of the reasons that I felt justified my decision for getting a Sprinter/cargo van. The fact that there are many more last mile opportunities, last mile gig app opportunities out there. How it plays out for the remainder of 2023, don't know. But I do know that the last mile gig delivery apps have put me in a position where it has allowed me to accomplish the goal of being less reliant on the gig food delivery apps like the DoorDash, the Grubhub, Uber Eats, the Instacarts, and even the catering apps, because I have experienced over the last couple of months very few catering opportunities, when in fact at one point the catering opportunities were almost taking over the gig food delivery opportunities. So there's always this constant change that you're going to find being out here. It's just that how do you react to the changes is going to somewhat dictate how do you dictate your success, or how much money that you're going to make each day, each week, and each month. So what I want to do for this specific segment of the Gig Geezer is to start the conversation about the last quarter. I feel that I've been one who's always tried to look ahead. I've always tried to look ahead. In fact, when I was a reporter, it was said that I was ahead of my time with the type of stories that I wrote. In fact, I'll just share it like this. Since my career pretty much spanned the late 80s throughout the 1990s up to the year 2000, when I was out of work for almost a year, all I heard from editors was how they wanted something different and refreshing. I wanted stuff hard-hitting and enterprising. And so I gave them that stuff. I thought about what was hard-hitting, what was enterprising, and I gave them that. Did it work for me? Yes and no, in that I was recognized as one of the best sports reporters back in 1998, which is almost in the last year that I was in the business. And many of the topics that I wrote on were topics that reporters really didn't do on a consistent basis for another 10, 15 years. What are some of the topics? Gender equity, sexual assault, racial issues, the business of college athletics. These are things that people really didn't talk about back in the 1990s. It wasn't until somewhere, well, you can say with the internet becoming very much a part of the daily lexicon. So that was like 2005, 2010, somewhere in there, you begin to see more stories on those issues. But I was looking for those type of stories back in the 1990s. So that's what I mean by being ahead of my time. I may not be ahead of my time operating a Sprinter/cargo van, but I'm always trying to look ahead. I'm always trying to keep my ear to the ground to hear what may be the next trend, because that next trend could put you on a fast track to where you really want to be. And so with that, if you like the content that's been provided in this segment of the Gig Geezer, hit that subscribe button, give my content a thumbs up, share my content among others, and I definitely welcome your comments in the section below. I'm in Wood Lane, and as always, may your grind and may your hustle continue.